Hello, everyone, and welcome to Autism Stories, where we connect you with amazing people that help autistic teens and adults become more independent and successful. I'm your host, Doug Bletcher, the founder of Autism Personal Coach. Many autistic people are very talented writers. But why is that, and what can be learned from the writing experience? We tackle these important questions on today's episode with Chris Bonnello of Autistic Not Weird. Chris is an award-winning writer and international speaker with Asperger's syndrome. In 2015, he launched the website Autistic Not Weird to share his insights from both a personal and professional perspective. We hope you enjoy today's conversation. Chris, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Now, you created the wonderful website Autistic Not Weird that, as of this year, I believe has had over 2 million page hits, which is quite an accomplishment. Now, I always enjoy learning about how the names of books, movies, or websites get their names. So, why did you decide to call your website Autistic Not Weird?
I didn't know I was autistic until I was 24, got the diagnosis at age 25, but right up to then, I've always known that I was the weird kid. That was pretty much my identity at school, Chris, the weird kid. And there are a lot of people who say that, well, yeah, it's good to be weird. Well, yeah, fair enough, they're right. But the way my weirdness was perceived back then wasn't really positive. And the website name, autistic but weird in a good way, but not in a bad way like it was when I was in school, it doesn't quite have the same ring to it. So, yeah, after growing up being seen as the weird kid and then later finding out as an adult that, well, actually it was autism all along. So yeah, having realised as an adult that this weirdness that people didn't particularly like as a child was actually autism all along, I was able to learn a lot more about what my personality actually was, and it was autistic, not weird.
Now, before creating Autistic Not Weird, you were a primary school teacher, and now you're a special needs math tutor. Now, there are some truly amazing teachers out there, but sometimes there are teachers that do things that are not in the best interest of autistic students. What are some of the common mistakes you've seen teachers make that were not in the best interest of these students?
I suppose the biggest one that I've seen personally is just occasionally you get a staff member who sees the autistic students as just the autistic student. What that means is looking at their actions and their personality as if like their personality is just an extension of their autism and everything needs to be seen specifically through autism lenses. Kind of forgetting that we actually do get to make our own personality choices as well. For example, let's say you get a child who's getting annoyed in the middle of a lesson or not engaging. You might get a staff member who thinks, oh, he's not engaging because of his autism. Well, no, the child might not be engaging just because the lesson's crap, or it just isn't something that interests them. Whereas obviously you do have to bear in mind that each student is autistic, and the worst you can do is treat them as if they're not at least a bit autistic, or that like their autism shouldn't even enter the equation. It is possible to go too far in the opposite direction and think that this is an autistic student, therefore I must see them for the autistic student they are, and forget the fact that, well, actually, we are allowed to have personalities as well. And sometimes we'll act in accordance with our personalities and not just our diagnoses.
Now, you've done something that's very scary for so many people, and that's moving from primarily one career to another. So how did you go about transitioning to a career in teaching to one where you are a writer?
Well, I'll try and shorten the story because it's a fairly long one, but I ended up leaving primary school teaching when I came to realise that teaching isn't so much a job, it's more of a lifestyle choice, and I've basically fallen out of love with the lifestyle choice. And as much as I cared about the people, as much as it was great spending my days around great staff teams and great kids, I just didn't love the job anymore. So I decided that, well, if you already know that you can't do this until retirement, logically the best thing you can do is start a new career now, not wait a couple of years and then lose a couple of years in whatever your new career turns out to be. So I left teaching pretty quickly after that, and, well, funnily enough, a couple of years later, ended up going back into teaching with this special needs tuition that I do. At the time, I actually believed that I'd never go into teaching at all ever again. But yeah, like you said, the plan, as much as I had a plan, was, well, maybe become a writer or something. It was this ridiculous idea I had at the time. The thing is, I grew up with what I called a pie in the sky, unrealistic dream job, and also a realistic job. The pie in the sky, unrealistic dream job was to become a writer or an author, and the realistic job was to become a teacher. Turns out I had a go at the realistic job and then decided I didn't want it anymore and ended up getting the dream job. But I try to remember how I actually made the writing thing work now. I think it was largely because it started off when I came to realise that after I left teaching, I kind of missed the opportunity to build people up and actually help people. And I realised that there's a lot of good that I'm not doing by not discussing my autism. So I launched Autism Not Weird, and I'll say straight away, I did not plan for it to get 108,000 Facebook followers, 2 million page hits, and people occasionally give me an award or things like that. That was not the plan. It was largely something that I wanted to do in order to keep a part of my teaching personality alive and start helping other people, whether they're local to me or on the other side of the world. But it involved doing a bit of research into blogging and writing down lots of things I spent lots of years thinking about, but not really had the chance or believed to have the chance to express in front of a worldwide audience. It turns out that people actually did like what I wrote, and then a friend of mine showed me this site called Patreon. Patreon is a website where artists, writers, musicians can get monthly support from their followers in exchange for various rewards, like $5 a month gives you access to bonus content, $1 a month gives you access to a private support group, and so on. And yeah, it just kind of grew from there, and now I spend several days a week working from home and writing for the internet, which is quite incredible.
Now, in 2016, you created a book called What We Love Most About Life.
Ah, yes.
Yeah. In which you asked 150 autistic children and teenagers what they loved most about life. Why did you decide to create such a book?
Largely because I don't think there are enough positive autism books out there. I mean, just about the first thing anyone learns about autism is that it's supposed to be a bad thing, and, well, I personally disagree with that. Then again, I guess you could call me a bit biased. But the thing is, autism can feel bloody isolating if you're the only autistic person you know. Like, at the age of 24, okay, I did know other autistic people, but I didn't realise I knew other autistic people because no one was talking about it. So I felt very much isolated, and yeah, it is not good for your mental health when you feel that way. So I decided, as well as the idea of this book being a shamelessly positive idea, it would also do a lot of good for autistic children who themselves believe themselves to be the only autistic child in the world. And amazingly, I have had people reading through this anthology of what these autistic children love most about life, and have got the reaction, wow, it's not just me. There are other real-life autistic young people around the world, and from 20 different countries around the world. Actually, it's and one thing I loved about it as well is exactly how many of the children in that book became friends with each other through the book. Because I knew that they would love seeing themselves in a printed book, but I didn't realise how much they'd love each other's pages, and it was just really wonderful to see.
Now, more recently, you've written a neurodiverse war novel called Underdogs. One really cool thing I think about this novel is that you can read the first chapter of the book online for free.
The first 3 chapters, actually, but yeah.
First 3, sorry.
Yeah, sorry.
Can you tell me and our listeners what this book is about?
Okay, so it's a near-future war novel where the whole of the British population's been imprisoned in these giant walled citadels, and there are only 12 people who are free in the abandoned countryside, who have taken up arms, and they're striking back against this army of 1 million clone soldiers to try and free the rest of the British population. And 8 out of those 12 people are teenagers who escaped an attack on their special school. So you've got autistic heroes, you've got dyslexic heroes, you've got heroes with ADHD or anxiety or Down syndrome, and they're the ones who are fighting to free the rest of society. And yeah, they get to be the actual heroes rather than the people getting rescued or something like that. And one really important reason why I felt Underdogs was needed is because, yeah, there may be an increasing demand to have autistic characters or characters with disabilities, but it's often done either based on stereotypes or just, oh, we've got an autistic character, we're doing diversity. So it's about time that, you know what, let's have a whole cast of neurodiverse people. And you know what, how about a whole cast of neurodiverse people with learning difficulties? Let's have an autistic character who isn't a savant and it doesn't have multiple university degrees. Let's have some autistic people who are brilliantly capable when allowed to play to their own strengths, but academically do actually have learning difficulties. And it's gone rather well. It's sold, I don't know the exact number of copies sold, but I do know that it's well over 1,000. And the publisher said yes to the sequel before the first one had even come out, which was quite an honour. And they even said yes to an audiobook, which traditionally only happens to the books that are really successful. That was one thing that genuinely did not see coming. So it's been a wonderful journey, really, and it's not even over.
Sounds like a great book, and I think the characters are really interesting and important, because when people talk about neurodiverse, they're almost replacing the word autistic with neurodiverse, and it encompasses a lot more people than those that have autism.
That is a good point of Freight. We talk about neurodiversity. It's a very easy trap to fall into. I don't think anyone falls into it deliberately, but if most of the campaigning you're doing is specifically about autism, it's very easy to forget about neurodiverse people who are dyslexic or have ADHD and so on. So, yeah, I think you're right. I think you're right. Whereas I don't think anyone deliberately only focuses on autism in terms of neurodiversity. It is something that we have a responsibility to not end up falling into the trap of.
And how can people go about purchasing either of your books?
Well, depends which country they live in. Generally speaking, Amazon is kind of the go-to place for the original book, but the American Amazon site is kind of on and off in terms of whether or not it has them in stock. So if you're struggling, you can go to thebookdepository.com, or Barnes & Noble apparently have it as well if you're American. And if you're British, then, well, amazon.co.uk is fine with Underdogs. And there's also Waterstones, and there's actually so many outlets selling it that I have to admit I can't actually remember them all. But Google Underdogs Chris Bonnello, or in fact go to chrisbonnello.com, Bonnello spelled Bonnello, and there's a page there which has all the up-to-date links as to where you can find them. If you want to pre-order the sequel, that's only available in one place right now, and that's on the publisher's website. Basically, go on unbound.com and search for Underdogs Tooth and Nail, and there's a sequel which is right in the middle of its pre-order stage right now.
Now, you've been writing for a long time. In doing research to interview you, I learned that you wrote in a journal for about 10 years prior to starting your website. Yes. So you wrote an article on Autistic Not Weird about 11 painful diary quotes from your worst years, in which you would encourage, and I would encourage anyone to read, because you talked about how you learned from each of these painful experiences.
It was a tough article to write, going through 10 years, quite specifically, of painful memories in order to, well, share them with the internet, but not just share them in a "oh, woe is me" type fashion, but like I said, actually with advice that people can take from, well, someone else's bad experiences.
How do you think a diary would help some autistic people cope with the challenges of their everyday lives?
No, it's curious. When I first started writing this thing, one of my motivations was just to make sure that I had a record of what happened on what day. So if I was wondering what I did on July 17th, 2005, I'd just be able to pick out the diary and look. But the more I wrote in it, the more I realised that it was a way of self-expression. I mean, there was loads of stuff going through my head that I didn't really want to talk to anyone about, or didn't even know how you would start a conversation about those difficult things. But having that diary there allowed me to just sit completely alone in a room with a laptop and just express myself to this Word document. And even though I didn't end up with other people giving me advice, it at least allowed me to get out what was in my head. So yeah, it was kind of, I'm not sure if anxiety relief is taking it too far, but it certainly helped me to put my thoughts in order.
I've come across so many autistic people that are very talented writers. What is it about writing that draws you in or is so important to you?
I can name a number of things, but one which I think is perhaps the most autism specific is that autistic people in general are living in a world that has been built with everyone else in mind. Like, schools are built with the 99% of non-autistic students in mind. Workplaces are designed with the 99% of the non-autistic workforce in mind. And if you, particularly if you're going up on the autism spectrum, if you're really feeling like you don't quite belong in the world that's been designed with everyone else in mind, or you don't feel like you have control over the bit of the world that you're in, writing allows you to basically invent your own universe where you do get to control what happens in it, you do get to have things on your own terms. Because I think humans in general have a need for control, and I don't mean that in a manipulative, control-freak type way, but people do want autonomy over the way they live their lives. They want to have control of the things that are in their immediate sphere of influence in order for them to be comfortable. If you're autistic, you often don't get that control. You often get other people making the decisions for you. You often find that the things you want are often the things you need, just aren't supplied for you because people are too busy accommodating the other 99% of people. Up until you start writing a story and you get to decide what happens in that universe. You get to build your own characters, you get to develop a storyline, and you get to decide what happens. And it's also just generally a lot of fun as well. I mean, after Underdogs got published, after it got accepted for publication, I was a little bit nervous that, okay, once this hobby becomes work, the fun element is going to just go from it. But I'm very relieved to say that no, that actually didn't happen. It became a lot busier, and the marketing side of it is obviously stressful, but the actual creative writing side of it is just as much fun as it's always been. I mean, just before you called, I was doing some work on the third instalment of Underdogs, and yeah, I'm just having fun.
That's great. Well, Chris, I really appreciate your time. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you for listening to today's episode, and thank you so much to Chris for the conversation. Did you know that Autism Personal Coach saves autistic people from feeling alone and being isolated? So often, autistic teens and adults struggle with anxiety and as a result don't have success in their lives. Autism Personal Coach is a unique service in that we help our clients by working on meaningful, individualized goals in the setting in which they'll be used so anxiety is greatly reduced, and as a result, people can become much more independent and successful. To get an autism coach for a loved one or yourself to achieve your goals or dreams, it's very easy. All you have to do is email autismpersonalcoach@yahoo.com or call 216-336-5889 and request a coach today. Next episode of Autism Stories, we will talk with April Stevens, the founder of Autism from Another Spectrum. Talk to you then.
Conversation issues, keeping it short. friendship with someone we like. Talking to people doesn't last that long. Going on outings, sometimes alone, sure is upsetting, but I'm sure we're fine. Talking to our friends can have some issues, constantly asking the same questions to them. Who am I? I'm a human too. I'm just like you.